again, I'm Joe Flower. I'm the South Zone wildlife biologist on the Shoshone Forest. I've been around since about 2018. I serve as the kind of the Forest Service representative on the Bighorn Sheep, the Whiskey Mountain Bighorn Sheep Technical Committee. And for anybody that's not familiar, the technical committee is made up of representatives from the Game and Fish Department, the Forest Service, BLM. We have some participation from the Fish and Wildlife Service as well. And we're kind of collectively responsible for managing habitat that supports the Whiskey Mountain herd. And before we really jump in, I'd just like to take a moment to thank my colleagues on the committee for many years of work that it's taken to get this far in this project to enhance habitat for this iconic and nationally important herd of bighorn sheep using prescribed fire. And thanks again, Sarah, to the Bighorn Sheep Center for hosting the webinar tonight and for your continued engagement and partnership to drive this project forward.
Our pleasure.
So I think my role tonight, folks, is to kind of offer some background and history on the Torrey Rim prescribed fire and to sort of drill down into the rationale for the project, sort of try to explain the big why here, make clear the purpose and need of the project and what we're trying to do objective-wise for the sheep. In the second portion of this talk, Brandon Bonenberger and Eddie McWilliams will jump on, our fire management officers from the South Zone of the Shoshone here, and talk about actual implementation of the burn, sort of cover the who, what, where, when, and how. And then we'll kick it over to Amy Anderson, and hopefully Jason Bringle can jump on here to talk through sort of how we're planning ahead to safeguard against post-burn invasive species concerns and some of our planning that's taken place there. So I think the way we'll try to structure this tonight is to sort of like make it through the content, let each speaker sort of provide their portions of the talk, and then just open it up to a good solid Q&A session toward like 7 or 6:45, and just provide as much Q&A as there is interest to sort of answer questions and hear feedback from folks, if that works. So just to start with an area orientation, many of you are intimately familiar with this landscape, but we're here on the east side of the Continental Divide. This project spans both the Shoshone Forest and the Whiskey Basin WHMA near Du Bois. What we're looking at here is just kind of an overview map. That red polygon is the glacier addition of the Fitzpatrick. That's where our primary burn block is, eastern flank of Whiskey Mountain here. And we talked a little bit earlier about the designation of that particular portion of the Fitzpatrick under the 1984 Wyoming Wilderness Act, specifically designated to protect crucial habitats for the Whiskey Mountain herd of bighorn sheep, and came with some interesting enabling legislation that provided some management flexibility to continue management actions that promote proper management of the bighorn sheep herd and their habitat. This whole area really provides crucial winter range and seasonal transition habitat for the Whiskey Mountain bighorn sheep herd. Probably don't need to speak to this too much for folks in the room that are intimately familiar with this herd, but quick refresher, anybody coming in cold on the Whiskey Mountain bighorn sheep herd. Whiskey sheep are one of the 8 core native herds in the state of Wyoming. That means they've never been extirpated or repopulated with transplanted bighorn sheep. And I always find it remarkable that this bighorn sheep herd has persisted on these rugged slopes of the Wind River Range for millennia. They're an iconic wilderness herd that once served for a source population for bighorn sheep reintroductions throughout the West. But unfortunately, for the last several decades, this herd has been struggling with poor lamb recruitment ever since an all-age die-off that occurred that was pneumonia related in the early 90s. This is a graph of kind of the sheep count trend over the years. And today, there are most 400 to 500 sheep in the Whiskey Mountain herd, spanning hunt areas 8, 9, and 10. And that represents a more than they're 50% below the postseason population objective, which I think most recently was about 1,350 sheep. So we've got this significant long-term population decline over the past several decades, primarily due to chronic persistent pneumonia and subsequent low lamb recruitment. Since 2018, the Game and Fish Department has had insufficient demographic data to produce an accurate population estimate for this herd, but in 2021, personnel from the Game and Fish Department classified a historically low number of sheep within the hunt areas 8, 9, and 10, and I think they counted 234 sheep. This is in part attributed to a no count conducted in hunt area 9 because of poor weather conditions. But with that said, in 2021, the lamb ewe ratios for the herd were higher than they've been in the last 5 years or so. They think they documented about 36 lambs per 100 ewes, 36 lambs per 100 ewes in areas 9 and 10, which is a significant increase in those lamb ewe ratios from previous years. So some glimmers of hope amid the gloom of just long-term population decline. Due to the growing concern over the trajectory of the herd, the Game and Fish Department led a collaborative process that resulted in a new management plan in 2019. And that plan's pretty comprehensive. It was a great update from the comprehensive management plan that we've been adhering to since the late 70s. That plan addresses multiple issues and factors related to the herd, including health and disease, habitat nutrition, speaks to predation, disturbance access, population management research, funding, and outreach and education. And one issue that collaborative process in 2019 really kind of brought back to the fore was this change in habitat conditions over time, specifically conifer colonization of many areas around Whiskey Mountain that were really once more open and dominated by grass forb communities. This is a picture taken from looking toward the Windy Mountain area around the turn of the century. And if you contrast that with current habitat conditions today, pretty big obvious change in just the extent of conifer cover on some of these core habitats for the herd. This is a similar picture taken from kind of that windy Whiskey Mountain area, 1904. And I think what we're trying to get across here is sort of a key point is that I think there's really little debate that a history of fire suppression and just sort of natural ecological succession and vegetation change through time has led to a higher density of conifers in the Whiskey and Windy Mountain area. And that habitat change of just kind of increased conifer densities in some of these habitats that were once more open and dominated by grass forb has likely led to some restriction in bighorn sheep seasonal movements, might have some effects about limiting access to some areas of suitable winter range, and just kind of has represented a general decrease in bighorn sheep habitat quality over the last century. And our 2019 management plan really calls this out and talks about implications for the herd. So just a quick excerpt from our plan here. It says, many factors have contributed to the loss and fragmentation of bighorn sheep habitats in the Whiskey Mountain herd, and of primary concern is ecological succession, that process of vegetation community change from one plant community to another. We point out in there that conifer encroachment has really dramatically altered many areas that were once open and dominated by grasses and forbs that were likely important foraging areas or migration corridors for this bighorn sheep herd and probably other wildlife as well. And that really is not a new concept or an issue. 40 years ago, our Whiskey Mountain Bighorn Sheep Comprehensive Management Plan sort of our guiding document for the tech committee, called this out as well, and called for sort of collaborative action to address that problem. We say in there from our old management plan that open areas of Whiskey Mountain are being encroached by conifers, and if not maintained, will revert to timbered stands. And if that's allowed to happen, there'll be a risk of reducing and eventually preventing essential bighorn sheep migration. And in here, we called out over 40 years ago now that judicious, properly planned and well-managed use of prescribed fire for habitat and migration corridor management really held sort of the key for addressing that problem on a landscape scale. So before I get into what we've already done in this country for prescribed burns, I wanted just to touch on the wildfire history in the area. This map's kind of messy, but it shows sort of that gray polygon, that gray oblique shape as our project area for the Torrey Rim prescribed burn. That bright red polygon is our primary burn block on the Forest Service. And those little hashed areas are the felling blocks. And I'll get into those a little bit later. The hashed polygons are old, basically wildfire burn scars through the years. And what I wanted to point out in here was that the last significant wildfire we had within this project area was the Jakey's Fork fire. That was in 1931 and was lightning caused. We did have an additional wildfire in the area, the Hidden Lake fire in 1976. That was a human start that didn't really provide any opportunities to manage for resource benefit. And we've had no natural ignitions or opportunities to manage natural wildfire in this area for resource benefit since about 2003. So yeah, it's been about 20 years since we've had real active wildfire and opportunities to manage wildfire for resource benefit within the project area. The tech committee has had a strong history of working collaboratively to implement prescribed burns in the area. And recent burns include the Torrey 1 burn in 2004 and the Torrey 2 burn in 2005. This map shows the extent of those burns. 2004, the Torrey 1 burn was within the glacier addition of the Fitzpatrick Wilderness. As we were operating in wilderness there, we didn't have any opportunities to sort of go in there before the fire to basically prep the burn with saws. So we didn't fell any trees prior to that burn. And we found that we didn't really get great outcomes from that prescribed fire. We had insufficient ground fuels, low burn intensity, low tree mortality, and kind of limited success. The Torrey 2 burn was much more successful. I think we took the lessons from that Torrey 1 burn and made some changes during the Torrey 2 burn of 2005. The main one being that on those game and fish grounds outside the wilderness, we did some selective chainsaw felling prior to that burn to basically selectively fell standing trees, establish a fuel bed, let those fuels cure out, and then ignited the prescribed fire, which allowed sort of those higher burn intensities, created some ladder fuels that allowed that fuel bed to sort of transition into the canopies of those trees and get some good tree mortality in there. And that one ended up being a pretty successful burn. Interestingly, some field observations and GPS collar data collected after that burn demonstrated that the sheep responded pretty well to that 2005 burn. They use that area today as wind protected loafing habitat, but tend to really avoid the dense forest in the glacier addition that didn't burn. This is a map of previous prescribed burns overlaid with sheep locations from 2015, 2016 GPS collar data. And just wanted to point out that the kind of extensive use of that Torrey 2 burn area in 2005, but real limited sheep use of these heavy timbered slopes within the glacier addition. And again, the key difference between those two burns was that trees were felled prior to the Torrey 2 burn, while no pre-treatment felling occurred during that Torrey 1 burn. And felling trees in advance of the Torrey 2 burn really provided the ground fuels we needed to increase burn intensity, get reduced tree densities, and really improve bighorn sheep habitat. Take a quick sip of water here. So with lessons learned from the Torrey 2 burn, as we were sort of preparing for the Torrey Rim prescribed fire that we're talking about today, we applied those lessons from the 2005 Torrey 2 burn and ended up contracting some selective felling work here in 2021, where we sent some contract saw crews through these hashed polygons that are our felling blocks, and had crews cut selectively fell conifers within those areas that encompass about 181 acres across those 4 felling blocks. Crews essentially went in there and cut, lopped, and scattered conifers that were less than 12 inches in diameter. And that really created the ground fuels we need to carry fire laterally and vertically within this primary burn unit on the Forest Service ground. And that's a picture that was taken shortly after the contract felling was completed. You can see about a 24-inch fuel bed established through that selective felling work. And again, completed in 2021, I think our trajectory here was to let these fuels cure out so that it would be receptive to fire. And then sort of phase 2 is to actually ignite in these areas. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So essentially what we're trying to do with this project is to take the current conditions in the primary burn unit and use selective felling and prescribed fire to move toward these desired conditions. And these pictures were taken within the Torrey 1 and Torrey 2 burn areas. But what we're trying to go from is, these areas of dense trees, high canopy cover, limited sight distances for sheep, understories that have pretty limited grass forage production, and move toward a condition using prescribed fire where we have a lot more snags, low canopy cover, good sight distances for sheep, and really a nice grass forage community within these burned areas. So we're basically trying to duplicate the success we had in the Torrey 2 burn across a larger area for the sheep. So kind of getting into the meat of the actual project here, what we're planning is a broadcast burn on the east flank of Whiskey Mountain and Torrey Rim on the state game ranges here to enhance bighorn sheep habitat for the herd. And really our objectives here are to open these movement corridors between winter and summer range, enhance forage conditions for the sheep, and create these kind of wind sheltered loafing areas that the sheep can utilize. And the burn was really designed to connect existing burn scars between winter range on Torrey Rim and higher elevation summer range on, yes, Amy, you can get my slides, and high elevation summer range. So with that, I wanted to pass the torch over to Brandon and Andy to sort of speak through the particulars of the project and plans for implementation.
Right on. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the great intro of the why of the project. And again, if anyone hopped on late, my name is Brandon Bonenberger, and I'm with Andy McWilliams, and we are fire management officers here on the South Zone, which is shown. You hit that next slide, Joe.
Yep.
Sorry about that. And we're just going to take you through a little bit of a 10,000 foot view here of the development of the prescribed fire plan. And then we'll try and end on where we're currently at today with monitoring up there. There's a lot that goes into this, and I really don't want to bore you guys, but I do want to get in the weeds a little bit just to show you how we developed this and what kind of thought goes into it. Next slide, Joe.
Stand by.
Sorry, this first couple are kind of quick, Joe, and then once we get into some of the map product and the burn
There you
plan.
go.
Right on, thanks. So Joe went over those resource objectives. That was brought forth through the tech committee and our NEPA process by our specialist. That was the why. And then we come in here to start dialing this up with our prescribed fire objectives, the how. And what we came up with to meet the needs of those goals and objectives was to achieve an average of 25 to 50% mortality across all stands within that Forest Service ignition unit. And we'll get back on some maps here in a second. And then 65 to 100 within those cut blocks, those black hash ones that Joe showed. And next, please. I wanted to throw this timeline slide in. Again, Joe did talk a little bit about the tech committee and then the Torrey burns 1 and 2. But about there from this project we're starting here is on the 2017.
Hey, Bones.
Yo.
You might just get real close to your mic there, and
we get some feedback. A little
there you
quieter.
go. That's better. Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. So this slide again, looking at just the timeline. Starting this project, a lot of the background. 2017 to where we are today. And I just want to say that there was a lot of planning, procedures, policies, things to go through to get this to where we are today. We started that 7 years ago, and we're just getting close to the process when we're allowed to start implementation. So this wasn't short and just a quick decision, but getting on there and allowing us to work through this and do what's right for the people. So there's a lot of time that was into this project. Next slide, Joe. Okay. Now, Joe did go over this map, but I kind of want to give you a little more insight on how we're planning these projects. The first thing we did is identify, where our primary ignition unit is, where we need to put that to best meet our objectives, of helping out the sheep with their open loafing area, habitat, and increasing forage. And so that first one's going to be the red block in the Fitzpatrick there. That's our primary ignition unit. And then the hash marks in there are the cut blocks. And so a lot of planning went into place of where to put this stuff and what makes sense for the project. Next is the game and fish blocks in there. And those are out of the wilderness. Those are the blue, the yellow, the purple, orange, and those ones along the face there. And why we put those in there was what we learned from the Torrey 1 and Torrey 2. There was a little bit of spotting downwind, and our predominant wind in DuBois on this project is a south-southwest wind. And so if you kind of just line those units up, the primary ones, if it were to move with the wind the way it would want to go, that is onto the game and fish. So we worked with them quite a bit, looking at our cheatgrass surveys and timing of those units, when to burn. And so we got the go ahead as our catcher's mitt, I guess if you say would be the best thing on there. So if we wanted to go down, and that's a transition from a timber fuel model to a grass fuel model. So prior to lighting our ignition units, we'd have to do a little black lining or put some black in those grass units. That does not mean all of those game and fish units would be black. We just like to put some lines on some existing roads in there to create a buffer for us. So if something were to spot or move out of the wilderness, we'd have an easier chance of catching it. And then we look at the project area, which is the big black blob around the whole area. And then again, a lot of thought goes into the project area. Fire is allowed to burn within the entire project area, However, we're only targeting ignitions in those Forest Service cut blocks. And then the game and fish, any line we put in there would be just to facilitate holding. So the big project area was drawn in on existing roads, natural barriers, lighter fuels, trails. Somewhere if the fire were to play around in there, get a lot bigger. Now we use a risk-based approach to where we're gonna put folks in there when we start to put the fire out. It depends on a spring and fall implementation. Right now in the spring, a lot of that is got snow holding on the backsides in the north aspect, or a moisture fuel condition. In the fall, you'd have the whole area readily available. However, we try and plan for something with an event coming, i.e. snow. Roger, I think we can hit the next one there. This was a repeat slide, but I just wanted to throw it back in there that we're taking what we learned from the previous burns and using data, science from the caller data as to where to strategically put those cut blocks in our units. This is why we're doing this project. This is where the sheep want to go, and we're going to help them get there. All right, Joe, next. Okay, this is the prescribed fire burn plan. This is what I really wanted to talk about with you folks and go over a little bit here.
Hard to hear.
I don't think I have any better mic in here. I guess I'll try and.
I think as long as you're kind of tidied up close to your mic, Bones, we can hear you when you're speaking fairly loud.
All right, I'll try to speak as loud and get as close to this guy as I can. My apologies. So the prescribed fire burn plan has 21 elements. This is policy. We have to have this in there. And it takes a long time to develop this. There's a lot of thought that's on this piece. And so we start with complexity analysis. In the complexity analysis, we look at what's in the project area. What are we trying to protect? What are our objectives? Can we meet those objectives? And then we start looking at values. Is there values within the project area and values outside of the project area? How are we going to protect those? We look at some other resources. We look at risk management. A lot of those go into it. And then there's a pre-complexity, and we will do the pre-complexity analysis. And then throughout the development of the plan, we'll circle back and have a post-complexity analysis. So that's where we start. And then we kind of work into the objectives. So we had our objectives already. And then we start developing. This is where I kind of nerd out, get onto a fire behavior modeling computer system. And so based on our objectives, we want to remove a lot of that overstory. Roughly half to 3/4 of the existing timber up there now. So we put this into a computer model, and also with local knowledge. Again, it is just a model. It's not solely based on a model. We have folks who've been doing this for a long time, have a good idea of the fuel types and what's burning in and what we need to see. And so we'll start out by saying, I want to remove this. And to do that, I would need a certain flame length. I would need a certain BTU and intensity to do standard placement fire. And to figure that out, I would have to figure out what weather parameters we plug into this model to give us those fire behaviors that'll meet objectives. So we put a bunch of models in, we get our prescription, and then once we get our fire prescription, that also tells us what flame lengths we're going to have, what rates of spread we're going to have, and then what fuel moistures we need to get that. And then we'll start working onto our organization. Once we get under our organization, so based on this model and the fire behavior and how fast it would move without any resources, it tells us what we need to have for resources our organization and equipment. And so we build off of that again to see what we need there on the prescribed fire itself to keep it within those units where we want to keep it in. Once we get past that, there's a big one here: pre-burn considerations and weather. This is one of them. Public outreach. There's a lot of press releases that have to be out. We have to, take up the equipment we need. Have to do our notification. We have to have the weather parameters. We have to monitor that, and then we just kind of keep on working around, and we get to our contingency and our holding plans. So once we run this model, we look at how many numbers we have to have up there, and once we get those numbers, we have part of our holding plan, and that's after the ignition. We'll work on holding the fire, and there's some new stuff in here that we're working on with the weather and the for our holding plan, critical weather step-up plan. And so I think I'll get into this in the next couple slides, Joe. So, but this is, I just want to show you folks that there's a lot that goes into a prescribed fire plan. It takes a long time to go through this. It's a lot of science based behind it, a lot of local knowledge, and just fire knowledge in general. This is what we do, but I just wanted to make sure for some folks that we don't throw something out there and think we're going to go light a match. It's well thought out. Next slide, please, Joe. All right, so once we develop that prescribed fire plan and get all those 21 elements in there, the burn is broken down to initially 3 phases: the ignition phase, mop-up phase, and patrol. And like I said, based on those prescriptions and the fire behavior, those phases have a certain required amount of people, but we have the opportunity or flexibility to move those resources, varying for each step up here. So ignition, we have the maximum amount of folks we need, and then as we work into mop up and patrol, the resources most likely go down. Once the trees are done burning, the fire's back on the ground, and we're looking at just working the edges, and so we don't need as many folks. And then patrol could mean just some folks, ocular observations from some point, but there's criteria in there for each phase, how many folks we have to have there and what it means. So once we move in from ignition to mop up, we start looking at mopping up, which means putting the fire out, for so many feet from the head. And then how many smokes are going to be up there, determine how many people are going to be there, how much is visible. And then we get into patrol phase, same thing. And with that weather step-up plan I was talking about, that allows us to monitor this constantly for many, many weeks. This phase could go, the ignition phase, we're planning on ignition, mop up, 3 to 10, patrol, couple of weeks. So we have people up there, but as we're monitoring the weather, working at the weather service, we if there's an event coming that may affect the fire behavior, if something's left up there, what we'll do is we'll re-ramp up and send the resources and plan for what might happen. We never know if the weather event's going to come or it's going to affect us, but we have the ability to ramp those resources to get up there in place before something happens. Next one, Joe. And I just wanted to show you here, this is out of the burn plan. So when we get those fuel and weather parameters, this burn plan is written for the spring and or fall. And it's whenever we're in prescription. And the temperatures here, sometimes in the spring, we're going to be down in that 45. But if our fuel moistures are lower, we'll be able to do that. So a range here, I look at it, from a 45 to 75. And then, our winds are a big factor, 20-foot winds from 10 to 24. So these are just some of the numbers that go into the product. And there's a lot more inputs that go in there. Like I said, fuel sampling, fuel moistures. There's just a bunch more inputs we can throw into this. But just want to show you, here's kind of what we're looking at. We have to follow this prescription. We are considered out of prescription if we're outside of these sideboards. Next slide, Joe. As we get here into the equipment organization, again, I told you, you folks, computer model and then local knowledge, access times, a lot of factors went into this, but just looking at the numbers here, you know, for our minimum people during these, there's going to be quite a few people up there. You know, just over 40 people are required during the fire and ignition phase. And then you see as we move up into mop up and patrol, we get down to less people. But again, the plan is written to accordion, and it's to just like accordingly what we need up there. So we'll make sure we have what folks are needed there to do the tasks. Next slide, Joe. And then part of that I told you was that contingency planning. That's the holding plan contingency. So this is written in also. We have the flexibility to bring in more engines or more firefighters as needed. And this is, again, contingency. So we're planning for it prior to the burn based on conditions. If we're on the higher end, maybe a fall prescription, or it just depends. But we have the flexibility to kind of put these people on the ready if we need them before something happens. Next slide, Joe. This is sort of where we're at right now. We're kind of in the orange arrow. So we had a stakeholders meeting this winter, starting with some public meetings. And then we're looking at that spring fall implementation start date of the 23 here. And this project, you know, I look at those, go back, you know, I'm going back to those prescriptions, those windows. There are some constraints that may hamper us from lighting this, you know, certain times of year. If the weather doesn't cooperate, we can't get a good window. That happens. If it's actually too dry in the fall and resources are committed to fires nationally, that might put us out of prescription. So we have to wait. So we're looking at about 23 to 25 is where we can start and then work into there. Those are a couple year window we're really trying to work on. And then obviously, you know, 23 and beyond there, the last thing is then they'll talk to this here directly, but just looking at our invasive and monitoring after the fact. And I'm sorry for the sound, folks. I thought I had a good sound check when I started, but I think this is the next slide will be the last one there.
It's doing better, thank you.
No worries. And then just wanted to thank, you know, all of our partners. Again, this project started many years ago, and without the help of our partners and partner dollars, support from everybody here, this would not be possible. I know we're not there yet, but a lot's gone into it. And I just want to finish it out, and you know, here in the Shoshone Fire Program, complete all the way through. So I think that's the end of me, and thank you.
Thanks, Bones. I think we got most of it, but if there's questions at the end for anything that we missed from Brandon or Andy, we can certainly pick that up in the Q&A. So with that, I wanted to pass the mic over to Amy Anderson to talk through sort of how we're planning for invasive species management considerations pre and post burn. And if Jason Brengle has jumped on and is able to make it, this is a good opportunity to get a little feedback from Jason as well. So Amy, go right ahead, or Jason, if you're on.
Yeah, Joe, can I try to share my screen just for a few pictures?
Yes.
I don't know if I can do it or not, but I will see if I can. I think I've tried to do this before and not had any luck, so maybe I better just talk.
Amy, you should be able to. If you, on the bottom of the screen where you have your panel, it should say screen share and you have permission.
Okay,
You could try.
let's see. Does that do anything?
We
Got
see-
it.
All right. So I just put this together today, so it might be a good opportunity for me to just run through it. But so I won't go through all of these slides, but I just want to touch on what has gone into this burn. Most of you know that it's been in the process to try to get these approvals to do this prescribed burn for many, many years. And the Shoshone National Forest personnel really did a stand-up job of pushing this forward, getting it through the NEPA process, getting it through the region and the Forest Service Director's office to make sure that they could get conditions right to make this burn happen. And through that collaborative process that we did in 2018 and 2019, one of the action items was to do some kind of annual invasive species inventory. So in 2019, we decided with this prescribed burn looming that we would do a census of invasive species on Torrey Rim. And some of you folks helped with that. We had 35 volunteers from agencies and the public. We walked 88 miles of transects across Torrey Rim looking for any invasive species. One patch of cheatgrass was found right along the edge of the rim, and Weed and Pest immediately treated that cheatgrass with Rejuvra. But when they were doing that, they also detected several large patches of cheatgrass down the slope. And plans were made to treat the cheatgrass aerially in 2020. However, our contractor in 2020 pulled out of that treatment because of they weren't comfortable doing the treatment on that steep of a slope. And so what we ended up doing was, oh, here's a picture of the transects that we walked. You can see that red circle was the area where they found the little patch of cheatgrass, and then identified those other patches down the slope towards the lake from that patch. And so we were not able to do the aerial treatment in 2020, and so we replanned it for 2021, which gave us time to do some pre-treatment monitoring. You can see the level of cheatgrass invasion on that site. We used a protocol called standard impact monitoring. It's a Daubenmeier frame where you estimate cover of the target weed as well as the desirable species. And we discovered between 35 and 45% coverage of cheatgrass in our 2 transects, which is a pretty high level of cheatgrass. And then we did a Rejuvra application. That's the herbicide. It's called Rejuvra on 677 acres of the Torrey slope below Torrey Rim, but on that slope above the conservation camp. You can see all of the cheatgrass kind of behind the slide there. All of that was treated in 2021. So pre-treatment is on the left, post-treatment is on the right.
Amy?
The first year, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm not sure your slides are advancing. We've just got your kind of your title slide here.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe
But-
I'll just talk.
There you go. There you go. Now we can see
Oh,
it.
okay.
Thank you.
There's a picture of the helicopter applying the cheatgrass. You can see all of the cheatgrass in the background. Here's the before treatment on the left and the after treatment in the right. We did not get good control of cheatgrass in the first year. We got about 50% control. We went from about 35 to 40% cover to 17 to 23% cover of cheatgrass, which is not good control. With Rejuvra, we should see closer to 100% control. What we think happened is we didn't get enough precipitation to incorporate that herbicide into the soil in 2021. But we did get, what's that? So we're hoping for better results this year. We'll see. That monitoring will take place again in June. We also treated the roadsides and disturbed areas in the Torrey Valley using both Plateau and Rejuvra to try to control cheatgrass along the road so it doesn't creep back up into these rangeland areas. So all of this is in response to that initial invasive species inventory that we did on Torrey Rim and in preparation for this burn. As most of you know, cheatgrass really likes fire. So if we apply fire to these landscapes, we want to do everything that we can to make sure that we do not lose very important, very intact, currently very intact winter ranges to invasive species. And so some of the concerns, we currently do not have the ability to do aerial treatments on Forest Service. I was hoping Jason would be here to kind of talk about where that is in the process. It's in the EIS phase of getting clearance to do aerial treatment in both Forest Service and wilderness. We're not there yet, but we're hoping to get there. Some of the other invasive species that have been detected both in the burn blocks and on the WHMA are musk thistle, Canada thistle. One stem of toad flax was found and removed, so hopefully that won't be a problem. And varying amounts of perennial pepperweed, not very much, but it could be there. So what the invasive species management plan will look like, we have amassed what Joe likes to call a war chest of funding, about $80,000 that is currently being held by the Fremont County Weed and Pest to allow for in 5 years, 3 to 5 years of intensive monitoring post-burn, using both horse crews and foot crews to monitor any areas where fire hits the ground to make sure that we do not, that invasive species don't go undetected on any of the burn areas. And then hopefully get clearance. Hopefully the Weed and Pest can respond to any invasive species outbreaks very quickly. And then hopefully that EIS process will be completed. So if we do detect any invasive species on the forest and the wilderness, we can jump onto those fairly quickly. So that's really all I have for that. Does anybody else have anything to add as far as invasive species?
That was a good cover, Jamie. I appreciate you putting those slides together. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we're getting close to the top of the hour here, folks. Maybe, yeah, we could just turn it to Q&A and try to answer any questions you might have or any feedback or comments. So please fire away.
Anything from participants?
I think to ask a question, you can either just unmute yourself and speak into your mic or type it into the chat. We're happy to field questions either way. Maybe while we're waiting for a question to come in, like
Well,
Brandon.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say this has been a long process because I was the one involved with getting some of that started. So I'm glad to see that it's moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. Certainly appreciate all your public service for standing on your shoulders to get some of this work done. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, we had a long time battle with our regional wilderness people. They misinterpreted, in my opinion, and what we had as tech committee members, Gary Butler and Jack Welch and those guys that met with Malcolm Wallop and Al Simpson and Dick Cheney at the time. and said, these are the things that we need to see in this Wyoming Wilderness Glacier Edition, because it's important sheep habitat. And they understood that, and they put that language into the Glacier Edition. And what happened was we got pushback from our regional wilderness people for as long as I was working. They refused to let us consider that. They interpret that to mean we could land a helicopter or put in drop nets to capture sheep. And I said, no, that's not the intent of, that wasn't the only intent that the tech committee took to our congressional representatives. They said we need to have the ability to manage habitat, not just capture sheep and remove them. So they didn't want to hear that. And I'm so glad that we finally got that person in the regional office to retire.
Thanks for that background, Mark. Really appreciate it. I see Bones, you got your Brandon and Andy, you have your hands up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, that kind of ties into Mark's comment he just had. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
So with the approval process that we did go through, we requested and were granted the use of aerial resources for the ignition and suppression of the prescribed fire. And right now, the plan includes the use of a drone and possibly a helicopter up there.
Well, and the use of chainsaws.
We have a
Thanks for that
question
clarification, Andy.
from Bill Sincavage. What is the approximate time frame for the burns? You mentioned 2023, but could you narrow that down a bit?
Yeah, we can, once the burn plan it's finalized, and so starting, the spring of 23,
Having trouble hearing you, Bones. Sorry, man.
Why is it you can hear Andy and not me?
There you go. I think if you're bumping that way,
That's a
we
good
can
spot.
hear you
Yeah.
well.
This is a good spot right here. Yeah, no, once we light the match, was that the question, how long or this the whole implementation phase?
When are you going to burn it? That's what they're asking.
Okay, when we're in prescription. So we have all those elements in that burn plan that we developed. And we, like right now, we have we put up a ROS station, a remote automated weather station, and we're doing field sampling every week. And we're right now is probably 2 weeks out of in prescription, but that we have to have a lot of things coming together, like the weather. We keep watching the weather. And so a couple weeks out right now, possibly our first implementation window. And then we're just going to keep on monitoring the weather in the fields. So when we get that window, we're ready to burn. So it could be this spring, could be this fall. I just wish I had a crystal ball that said when all that snow is going to be gone and when those fuel moistures are going to be low enough that it'll carry fire. But we're doing the best we can to monitor those right now, so we don't miss the window.
Thank you, Bones. And I know that we have two people on the meeting tonight that actually live right on Trail Lake Road. So you guys spoke in January about the messaging for those folks in that area. Could you remind us of the outreach for the people who live on Trail Lake Road?
Yeah, in the burn plan proper, we have a notification process, which is one of those 21 elements. We've got everybody's names and numbers and added a few more. And so prior to the plan, we've already done our press release. Once we think we're within a week or two, we will do another press release out to the papers. And then the day before the burn, we will call everybody and let them know what we're doing. And then we'll close the loop on that when we're done with the project. And then any other signage we'll have the trailhead. Along the way, there'll be some PIO action. So during implementation, prior and post, we will have some folks out there to answer some questions and some signage put up. And I just saw that pull in the chat. What did that last one say about?
The whole process from first match to being complete takes how long?
The whole process. It depends on a spring or fall burn. So I kind of touched on it just a little bit. We're thinking the implementation on the ignition phase, 1 to 3 days. If we have to blackline a little bit on there, on the game and fish stuff, that's a day there, and then ignition units on proper. And then the mop up, that depends on if we got a season-ending event coming, which would be the fall, i.e. snow event. We may have to spend some more time mopping up. So I wish I could say exactly, but conditions, we'll have folks up there for a couple weeks for sure.
Thank you.
Is that Amy's question? How long do you anticipate it'll take for the forage habitat to fully recover from the burn?
Well, it kind of depends. That crystal ball thing would come into play again, but when we've done burns up there in the past, like the 2005, 2004, and 2005 burns that Joe was talking about, those areas greened up really quickly, the grassland areas, and provided pretty immediate forage for the sheep. But that's if we do a spring burn. If we end up doing a fall burn, there could be some removal of that forage that would carry the sheep through the winter. So yeah, it just really depends. I think those grasses and forbs, they respond really quickly to fire. So within the next year or two, we would see good forage recovery, and hopefully not invasive species, hopefully good forage, as intact as those winter ranges are. We're likely to see good recovery of those forages. Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the, it depends. I think a lot of that's going to depend on post-burn precipitation and some of those conditions we get after the burn. If we do need to go to a fall burn, we do have some sideboards built into this project that require basically the implementing agencies to circle up with the Bighorn Sheep Technical Committee to try to identify some measures to minimize the amount of winter forage we ignite. So we'll kind of do the minimum necessary blacklining and burn prep and try to conserve as much winter range as we can if it ends up being a fall burn. Is that fair, Brandon?
Yep, that is correct. We'll get together. That's in the NEPA document and our PDFs, and that's what we will do, talk about that. And we want to help as well. We want to minimize as much forage loss up there as possible. And so that means, blacklining some roads, just what we can do minimal, and also be within prescription and not be chasing spots up there. So we got some great ideas. Been up there a couple times this year. Been up there last year, all spring, and I did a lot of map exercises. So we've got a good plan for that.
Hey, Amy, this is Mark. The tech committee is still doing the utilization and production clippings.
Yep, I just finished them here the last couple days.
Okay, so we'll know what kind of utilization, but I bet it's not like it was in the early 90s.
Yeah,
both. We have a lot less sheep eating.
Utilization for the last 5 years hasn't even come close to a 50% utilization through the winter on those winter range sites. And production actually hasn't been as high the last few years either. Partly because there's so much residual forage. It's just not getting used up there the way it used to. So yeah, there's a lot of forage up there right now.
Yeah, so the fewer sheep we have, we'll have enough forage up there if we burn some of it.
I believe so. Especially since we have so many fewer sheep than historically.
Yeah, that was my point.
Yeah, and with that, is there a plan in place? Are you working with Game and Fish or Monteith to do specific monitoring of that area to see use by the bighorn herd?
We'll probably continue at least on the winter range, just to do our annual production utilization transects. Yeah. Along with photo points, Joe has, like he showed, those good pre-burn photo points that we'll be able to repeat just to show what comes back. And then weed and pest doing those intensive invasive species transects. They'll be able to see what's coming back also. And I think we've got a good plan in place.
Cool.
Well, I wish you success.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Any last minute questions, folks? Well, hearing none, sure appreciate your time this evening. And yeah, I just wanted to again recognize all the partners that have come to the table to make this project possible. It's been a real collaborative effort to drive this thing forward. And thanks again, Sarah, to the Bighorn Sheep Center for hosting this meeting so that we can get the word out about the burn and answer questions. Certainly appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful night.
Hey.
Thanks, Sarah.
Great job, guys. Great job. Very informative and a good presentation. Appreciate all the information.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.